To Zimbabwe now, where the African country is gearing up for major elections in a few weeks. But politically charged violence is escalating across the region.
This comes after a deadly bombing targeted Zimbabwe's president at a recent election rally. At least 2 people were killed and dozens were injured in this explosion just a few weeks ago. We've learned police have arrested 2 suspects linked to that attack.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa survived, but this bombing has raised concerns over Zimbabwe's election security. For more on this, we want to bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Debora Patta. She's with us now from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you so much for being with us. Now, Debora, what's the latest on this attack, and do they have any idea who is responsible for targeting the president?
I should point out right from the start that a bombing of this nature at an election rally is highly unusual in Zimbabwe. Something like this only happened in the 1980s. Although previous elections have been marred by violence and intimidation, this kind of attack is very unusual. 2 suspects have been arrested, as you pointed out, but very little information has been released on them. So we've only got the current president, Emmerson Mnangagwa's version of events. He has blamed this attack on a faction linked to the wife of the former president, Robert Mugabe. That's Grace Mugabe. Now, the former president wanted his wife, Grace Mugabe, to succeed him. She was dubbed Gucci Grace because of her flamboyant shopping sprees and was deeply unpopular in Zimbabwe. And much of that is what led to him being forced to resign in what is essentially a bloodless coup that occurred last year. So Mnangagwa has blamed it on her faction, the G40 faction, but he really has no proof, and he's had to admit that he has no proof. Another theory doing the rounds is that this is some kind of inside job to give Mnangagwa an excuse to crack down on opposition supporters. But given the fact that he himself survived what effectively was a near assassination attempt, this seems highly unlikely. He also needs a free and fair election if he wants to bring the economy back into sufficient working order in the country.
Debora, for people who aren't aware, can you give us some background on Zimbabwe and its struggle to overcome the violence and economic turmoil over the years, especially under former President Robert Mugabe?
Well, you know, it was nearly 4 decades of brutal rule. Mugabe came to power in 1980. So this time, when the elections take place at the end of this month, will be the first time in that entire period that Mugabe's name will not appear on the ballot box. Previous elections have seen horrific violence. We've seen hundreds of thousands of opposition supporters being banned, being arrested, being detained, violence against them, being tortured, and in some cases even murdered. I've covered 2 elections in Zimbabwe, and neither of them have been regarded as free and fair. A lot of vote rigging went on. In the 2008 election, the opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, won the first round, in fact, but then in the playoffs, he lost it. And many believe that that was unfairly rigged and that there was no freeness or fairness about that election at all. So that's marred nearly 4 decades of rule under Mugabe. But perhaps the most significant harm done by the rule of Mugabe, in addition to the violence and intimidation of people who have spoken out against him, has been the damage to the economy. This was once the breadbasket of Africa. This is an economy that is in tatters. He left a country in ruins, a currency that is absolutely worthless. Mugabe needs a free and fair election if they are to continue on a path to rehabilitating that economy.
Well, speaking of that election, the opposition candidate, Nelson Chamisa, does he even stand a chance against President Mnangagwa and the military?
Chamisa is an interesting character. He was a former youth leader, 40 years old, very charismatic, much younger than Mnangagwa, and previously the MDC has done very well. But I think there's a bitter irony here, that it is the leaders, the opposition leaders, people like the previous Morgan Tsvangirai, who died this year of cancer, so never got to contest a free election, and people like Tendai Biti and Welshman Mncube, who suffered terribly in that time. Those people are the ones who brought so much pressure to bear on Mugabe, but they probably may not reap the benefits of that in this election, because Emmerson Mnangagwa, the ruling party's candidate and the current president, is capitalizing on the fact that they were the ones to ouster Mugabe. They gave him the boot. They forced him to resign, and that could stand in their stead. The biggest issue, though, that Chamisa will be facing is, will this election be free and fair? And as I've said, Mnangagwa needs a free election. He can't have this election tainted, because the West has said they will not even consider debt relief or an easing of sanctions unless there is a free election. So I think we can assume that there will certainly be an attempt to have a free election. But even with that, Chamisa may not win, given the playing of politics in that country right now.
President Mnangagwa is known as the crocodile, but that's to his supporters and his enemies. He recently talked about this in an interview. So let's take a quick listen.
I am as soft as wool. I am a very soft person in life, my brother. You should understand that I'm a family person, I'm a Christian. And because they have read so much bad publicity by my enemies, which has sunk into you, I don't blame you. But as we go on and as you relate, you discover that you were wrong. Then if you are man enough, you come and say, Comrade Mnangagwa, I was wrong about you. You're such a nice man.
He's turning on the charm offensive there, but can the crocodile win over the people of Zimbabwe on July 30th? And also, how has he changed the country since taking power?
Well, you know, I mean, I think soft as wool is stretching it a little bit. I don't think anyone would say Mnangagwa is soft as wool. This was a man who was a former acolyte of Mugabe. He is the man who is believed to have been behind much of the violence during those elections that I spoke of. This is a man who's also believed to have had a hand in rigging those elections to ensure that Mugabe had an electoral win and that he kept in power. So I think soft of wool is a little bit of a stretch, but he certainly has been trying to not only rehabilitate the image of the country, but his own image as well. And he has made significant changes in that country. For example, elections so far have been, for the most part, allowed to be conducted freely. Candidates have been able to campaign without any intimidation, without violence, notwithstanding the bomb attack. That was something that was a little out of the ordinary. Freedom of speech, things have started opening up there. The arrest of political opponents has slowed down dramatically, certainly compared to the time under Mugabe. And Emmerson Mnangagwa has repeatedly said Zimbabwe is open for business. He is trying to woo international investors. He has even gone so far as to legalize marijuana farming for medicinal purposes. That's raised the eyebrows of some of the more conservative members of Zimbabwean society. And at a trade conference, he allowed commercial sex workers to exhibit there to sort of educate the public about their work and what they do. And again, this was seen as maybe a little bit too much too soon for a country like Zimbabwe, which is inherently quite conservative when it comes to social issues. Will the charm pay off? We'll only know at the ballot poll, but he is certainly giving it everything he has.
All right, Debora Patta for us in Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you very much.